Hello, everybody. My name is Brian McMurdo. Thank you for joining us for this session titled GIS and Public Safety, the New First Response Frontier. I'll be moderating today's session, but before we begin, I wanted to let everyone know that we are recording these webinars and all attendees are muted for quality assurance purposes. If you have a question, please use the QA section of this platform and we'll answer them in the end of the presentation. Today I have the honor of introducing one of my teammates, Sarah Rollins, as the presenter of this webinar. Sarah is a public safety GIS expert with Datamark. She has over 9 years of experience in the GIS industry and over 15 years as a technical trainer and training designer. She has filled roles in geospatial related services, including sales, sales engineering, analysis, and education. Her area of expertise includes GIS data projects involving assessing and remediating public safety data for E911 and NextGen 911, educating public safety GIS professionals on best practices and standards for maintaining public safety grade GIS data, and designing workflows to optimize public safety database management and accuracy. She has 3 children, and yes, believe it or not, she was a singer in a rock and roll band. So I'm going to throw this over to Sarah to sing us a song. I'm just kidding, Sarah. Right over to you for your presentation.
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today and for attending our public safety virtual conference. This is such a momentous time, and I'm so glad that we're all finding a way to continue to share and collaborate. And as Brian said, I'm Sarah Rollins, and I am a total geek when it comes to anything GIS related. Before I fell in love with GIS, however, I got my degrees in sociology, specifically in organizational behavior. And I'm really glad to have the opportunity to share my thoughts about a different aspect of what NG911 is bringing to our table. That is the new culture that is emerging as public safety and GIS come together in new ways for NextGen 911. So hopefully you can all see my presentation screen, GIS in Public Safety, the new first response frontier. And those of you on the call today probably already know that for 911 efforts, GIS and public safety must work hand in hand from this point forward, even more so than you've had to work in the past. And what I'm hoping to bring to you today are the tools and concepts and perspectives that will help you bring this all together from an organizational standpoint. I always like to know my audience, and today, of course, I can't meet you in person and shake your hand. So I actually have a couple of polling questions to help start us out so I know who's on the call today. So Brian, if you want to launch that first question, that'd be great. Hopefully everybody can see that that poll. Yep, I'm seeing people come in. So yes, I'm just curious to know, out of those of you on, what level do you operate at? Are you local GIS? Do you work in the PSAP? I'm seeing lots of great answers come in. I'm going to move it over here because I don't know if you can actually see it or not. All right, great. Looks like everybody's probably in. We've got 47%. Any more want to volunteer what they do? There we go. Let's get a few more. All right, Brian, we can probably end that. So the vast majority on this session today are local GIS, but we do have a good amount of PSAP folks and a couple people from the state and third-party vendors. So that's great, thank you. And I have another question. Brian, if you want to go ahead and do the next one. I'm wondering, what is your focus within your roles? What's your focus? Is it GIS? Is it public safety? Is it health and human services? Is it government administration? Let's see, do we need to end this one, Brian? I just ended it for you. Here's our results. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and launch this new one. So here's the new poll. Just curious to know what our mix is. Super helpful to know. Thank you. All right. So mostly GIS, a lot of public safety, not a big surprise given the nature of this conference. So great. Thank you all for letting me know who I'm talking to today. So let's get started. What is culture? Well, there are many definitions of culture out there, and in this presentation, I really want to emphasize how a culture is designed and defined. And here's one definition that I found that I liked by Larry Sen. He's an organizational consultant. So according to Mr. Sen, every community, and we are of course a community, has its own unique culture. And this culture is defined by a collective set of values and habits. These condition the actions of people within any organization. And cultures can happen either by default or by design. Successful leaders shape their cultures by design instead of allowing their cultures to be shaped within the community by default. So leaders who treat culture as a business strategy and have an ongoing commitment to continually refining that culture in response to whatever changes come across our table, these organizations are going to respond much more effectively. So the culture, to me, what's really important here is that it's the collective set of values that define this culture, and that when we treat culture as a business strategy in response to major changes, that's when we set ourselves up for the most success. So what creates the need for a new culture? Well, the culture of any society or community is constantly changing, and it especially changes under certain conditions. There's two. So a cultural change can occur when there are technological advancements, and these advancements necessarily influence that society or community. And I'm sure we're all immediately thinking of all the technology that is constantly changing in our public safety industry. The culture can also change when one culture comes into contact with another culture, and those cultures share and transfer ideas, and that too can change a culture. You think about when North America was colonized. Lots of culture changed in all sorts of directions. All right, so what does this have to do with GIS and public safety? Well, if you're in GIS, you know GIS is prolific. And for those of you who aren't in GIS, you might also be really aware of how much GIS comes into our everyday lives. So here are some examples of how GIS is probably being used in your county or your city or your state. And as you can see, public safety is just one of many. GIS has many and constant demands on how the science of GIS is applied and implemented. So I want you to think a little bit, how is GIS being used in your county and city? Not just in public safety, but beyond. And most GIS departments have specific types of data that they consider foundational to the tasks and workflows that the states or the counties or municipalities. All of these need to be managed, maintained, and updated. So depending on how your municipality or your county or your state uses the data, you might use any combination of these data sets for public safety. So GIS has a lot going on behind the scenes to create this backbone. In order to talk about the new culture that NextGen is creating a need for, I want to first just briefly go over the basics of legacy or E911 and then NextGen 911. I know we've got a mix of people watching right now, so I'd like to level up people's knowledge, and I promise I'll be brief. There is, of course, a lot more to what I'm going to cover on this aspect right now. If you want a deeper dive, please reach out to me or anybody else at Danamark after this session. We used to travel and present workshops all over the country, and now we are ready to come to you via webinar. So again, if you want a deeper dive from what we're doing right now, please let us know. All right, so what is a PSAP, or a public safety answering point? And of course, those of you who are on the line who come from PSAPs or any public safety background, these next few slides are going to be a total review for you. But I want to make sure our GIS folks and other people are familiar with these terms. So real briefly, a PSAP is a fancy term for a 911 call center, literally where the call is answered. And there are two types of PSAPs. There's a primary PSAP, and that's the PSAP that directly receives a call that is routed to it. And then a secondary PSAP. And a secondary PSAP receives 911 calls that were answered by a primary and then transferred from the primary to that secondary. So this is just a little bit of terminology. And some fun facts about 911. As of 2019, there are between 8,500 and 8,700 PSAPs nationwide. That is a lot of organization, a lot of people to coordinate, a lot of data. And the first 911 call was made in 1968 in Haleyville, Alabama. And Enhanced 911, or E911, or what we call Legacy, this came about in the early 1990s. And this is when location information of the caller began to get delivered with the call. Before, it was completely dependent on the caller saying where they were calling from. With E911, we started to get location information embedded in the call from a database called the ALI, or the Automatic Location Information Database. And there's also the associated MSAG, or Master Street Address Guide. I know most of you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, but with E911, calls were routed to the PSAP based on information in a table with no geographic or spatial reference or spatial information. Now that over 80% of 911 calls are from cell phones, and some estimates place that number much higher than that, a caller's identification still really depends on their ability to communicate their location to the call taker. And the non-spatial ALI and MSAG remain the key elements to address verification, even though the data in these two databases, everybody who works with them knows that they can be inaccurate, they can be incomplete. They're managed by different organizations even. The ALI is managed by the telephone provider, and the MSAG is usually a municipal or county or state level MSAG coordinator. So there's a lot to coordinate here. And again, none of it is spatial. Well, the current state of 911 today, it's based on 50-year-old technology. It's incomplete. Addressing data is sourced from whoever the associated telecommunication provider is. And again, it's non-spatial table-based data that is used to route the calls to the correct PSAP. And really think about this. I'm talking about getting the call to the call center. I'm not talking about sending a responder to the call. I'm just talking about who's going to even handle this call. So in current state 911, the telecommunications provider is the major stakeholder since the ALI is used to route the call. And no major federal investment has really been made in 911 in decades, but NextGen is going to change that. So our future state of NextGen 911, it's going to eliminate the ALI database, and it's going to place the responsibility for the maintenance and coordination of the MSAG onto the 911 authority, or the PSAP. So out of the telecommunications arena and into the public safety arena, which doesn't that make sense? Because this is for public safety after all. And for the first time, we're really seeing significant dollars being put into 911. And GIS data has become the most important thing in the transition to NextGen 911 in terms of call routing, because it's actually GIS data that's going to be used to route the call to the correct PSAP instead of a table of data. So for those of us who like pictures, and I do, let's take a look at what GIS in today's PSAP looks like. So typically in a PSAP, the GIS is the map, and then the GIS supports other public safety systems. It's going to support your CAD for routing your responders. It's going to give you your 911 map, or the map, quote unquote. And there can be other operational applications like AVL and crime analysis. And that's what GIS feeds right now. And it's very important. And all of these data sets are significant in supporting these PSAP functions. But in tomorrow's PSAP, it's going to have to change, because right now, GIS data comes into play after a 911 call has been routed to the PSAP for dispatch. And as we go on in this presentation, we'll see how that's a problem and what that does with our culture. GIS in tomorrow's PSAP in NextGen, it's going to be used at the very front end of the call handling process. And it's going to be actually used to route the call to the correct PSAP at the beginning of the call. And of course, it will continue to be used in the CAD system, in the mapping, in AVL, any other systems that GIS is currently supporting. So GIS in tomorrow's PSAP are going to populate two key functions in NextGen. There's going to be the LVF, or the location validation function, and the ECRF, which is the emergency call routing function. And these are the crucial elements. The LVF makes sure that a civic address is routable, and the ECRF makes sure the call is routed to the PSAP based on the call's actual location, not on a table full of data. So the end result is that now we are going to have geospatial call routing. In the simplest of terms, geospatial call routing is quite literally a point in polygon query performed in the ECRF, or in the emergency call routing function. And when a call is routed based on its location, if the GIS data is incomplete, as with this gap between the PSAP areas, if a call comes in and those areas are not cleanly and clearly defined, the PSAP is unknown. And of course, the system will have rules built into it to handle situations like this. However, incomplete GIS data presents delays in getting the call to the PSAP and then getting the help to the caller. And as we know in public safety, these seconds really do matter. So why does geospatial routing make a difference? Well, I'm going to tell a story to illustrate this. I think today our sessions have been very storytelling in nature. All right, so you see here a picture of a gentleman sitting on a bench. He is right outside of an emergency room door. You can see that in the upper right. And the benches are lit up. But the story is important because this gentleman's wife died sitting on this very bench. The benches were not lit up. And she was on the phone with 911. And yet no one could find her. She was literally outside the door. She could see the door. No one could find her. First, her calls didn't go to the correct PSAP, which is the big issue that I was just talking about, and those transfers wasted precious time. And when the calls did get through, no one could find her in the dark until it was too late. So her husband got together with the sheriff, and they decided to test calling 911 from the very spot of her death. You can see the bench circled there on the map. And they used several different phones and several different cell carriers. And they recorded all of this, and of course they cleaned it up. And I'm going to play for you a recording of the testing. And you're probably going to have to turn your speakers up because it's kind of hard to hear. But we're going to go ahead and play it. This recording is about 4.5 minutes long.
We're just doing a test of 911 calls and some calls to see how they actually reach the police department. My name is Peter Dworko. Okay, we're going to do some T-Mobile as our next call. Operator, I just want to make clear that there is no emergency. I have no emergency right now. I'm simply calling because I was told that if I call 911 within my town, it will now go to the local police department. Could you tell me what department this is? Boston Police. Okay, the Boston Police Department. Okay. I guess I'm actually I'm in Somerville. Can I ask why I'm calling to you?
You have to have state police on the ground because that's been going on for quite some time. We get calls from all the police, Everett, Chelsea, Brookline, Cambridge, they just come to us first, and we end up having to transfer more to your district, to your city.
Do you know what town I'm in then? Can you see it on your screen there?
No, that all goes like phase 1 and phase 2 locations on phones, depending on subscribers, so on and so forth. Different regions, different locations. Right now, I'm in absolutely nothing on you. It all depends. It all depends on the phone service subscriber. That's again something you might want to ask your, whether it be AT&T, Verizon, whomever, because it really, at the end of the day, has to do with that. What type of phone you have. Like for instance, track phones, 911 cells, anything you have prepaid. We're never going to get a location on that ever.
Wow, okay. This is actually it's a T-Mobile phone, and so actually different carriers do you like see different, it really matters which carrier you have, which cell phone carrier you have?
It depends on the phone. We don't know exactly why it is that we do or we don't, but that's the system. So we can retransmit and try to get a phase 2 location, which is going to be generally a good and accurate location, but we're never going to know the exact address. When people ask me about this on the street every day, I say, please, when you call into 911, it to be a minimum, give an address, because we don't know where you are. There's never a guarantee that we know where you are at all. We don't always have a location on you, and at the end of the day, if we try to take your cell phone or trace it to whatever it might be, if someone was called in and says you're having suicidal thoughts and they want us to take the phone, that could take us a half hour to an hour before we ever even know where you are.
All right, so we're going to call T-Mobile again to see if it's transferred again. Where it ends up. Let's see where it goes. No, we'll just ask them to transfer this. Maybe the same operator will answer. Sure, sir. There's actually no emergency here, sir. I'm calling because I was told that if I call my cell phone in my hometown, then it will go to my local police department now. Could I ask who is it? What department is this to answer my phone? It's Boston Police. Okay. Do you happen to know where I am, sir? I guess on your phone, on your screen. Whoa, in Charlestown. Wow, that is nuts. A mile away. Was that phase 1 or phase 2, by the way? That was phase 1. Yeah, that's good. Okay, that's close, sir. That's pretty close. Could you connect us, sir, to the Summer Police Department now? We want to see what they get on their screen. Hey, John. It's Steve. Oh, what do you got? Do you have we have a phase 2 coming at 30 College Street within 16 minutes. That's also an XY phone. And that's coming at the same location as well. Oh, there's 2 different readings, but they're both the same.
For those of you that have taken calls like this, that location was not accurate. It wasn't going to the right center. And in that urgent time of need, trying to find the right place to get the caller the help they need, that has got to be such an uncomfortable position and distressing. And if anybody attended our session this morning with Ricardo Martinez, we definitely got a great feel for that if we're not in a PSAP and doing that work. So is this location good enough? I don't think so. It's close, but it's not close enough. And of course, as we could see on the maps, these calls were getting routed to all different PSAPs and especially all the way out to Boston, which wasn't going to help. So let's think about then, if this call had been routed to the correct PSAP using GIS on the front end, how might the outcome have been different? And this is why NextGen and GIS are so crucial. So what creates the need for a new culture? Well, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, technological advancement and cultural change. Let's talk about the first one, how cultural change can occur through technological advancements, and these do change society. And what again does this mean to GIS folks and to public safety? Well, Andy Faust, he is a senior GIS analyst for the North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. And in the February issue of the Wisconsin Counties Association, their publication, he really summed this up perfectly. And I don't usually read my slides word for word, but I'm going to this time because it's just worded so well. So NextGen 911 fully embraces GIS technology, bringing it into the center of the 911 system. In any 911 call, there are two GIS-based core services at play: the emergency call routing function, which dictates where to send the call for service, and the location validation function, which determines whether an address is valid for routing and dispatch. And for these NextGen 911 core services to function properly, data sets such as street center lines, address points, PSAP jurisdiction boundaries, emergency service providers, these boundaries must exist and need to be accurate and up to date in your GIS and your 911 systems. In NextGen requirements, up to date equals 3 business days. For anybody in GIS, how many other GIS functions do you serve right now that require a 3-day turnaround? Public safety is used to urgency, but GIS typically isn't really used to that kind of urgency. And with NextGen, GIS is going to have the requirements because we're now the stakeholders of this data. So this is going to change how we operate in GIS, and because we're now going to be collaborating with public safety, it's going to change how everybody operates. And what this means is that GIS has in fact become geospatial first responders. And I really want you people to think about this. If we think of location, 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 people like to joke about that, right? You know, when you're setting real estate or buying a house, it's location, location, location. But with GIS and public safety, this means that GIS and analysts and GIS data providers are now geospatial first responders. And this is really exciting. This really excites me as a GIS person. First responders are dispatchers and call takers, and what they do is so crucial and vital to everything in 911. And now what GIS folks do is going to influence this whole process before the call even reaches the PSAP. So I want everyone listening to think about this. If you're in GIS and if you haven't embraced what a crucial role you have, now is the time to do it. I want you to wear this with pride. And if you're in public safety and you're beginning to understand how GIS is going to influence what you do every day, now is the time to realize that you have partners in GIS. And what about changes that occur through contact with other cultures? Well, once again, Andy came through with a great quote in the WCA publication. As counties in Wisconsin, and anywhere really, move forward with implementing NextGen, it's important that there be a coordinated effort from the land information community, local PSAPs, counties, any planning commissions, emergency communication. All of these groups need to come together to implement NextGen 911 efficiently in the entire state. GIS data sets will need to be quickly published into a statewide national system in an efficient and organized way. The Wisconsin Land Information Association, for example, and no matter what state you come from, there may well be other organizations like this. But the WLIA took a lead in promoting GIS data standards and the education and best practices that will help as PSAPs move forward into NextGen 911. So I encourage those of you listening to think about, where are you in your state? And what is your state and the different agencies? What are they doing to work together to bring this together to create these best practices? We're all relying on each other in a different way, and we're all collaborating for this one great humanitarian effort that we call 911. What this means is there's going to be more data, more workflows, more agreements, more interactions with neighboring jurisdictions, more tools, new funding processes, and any time that you collaborate in a new way, you're creating a new community, and that creates the need for a new culture. So NextGen 911 is creating the need for this new marriage between public safety and 911 in a way that really hasn't quite happened before. So I have a couple more polls. I just am curious to know what you all are doing in terms of collaboration. So Brian, if you want to launch this poll. I can't tell if it's coming up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and try to launch this poll. All right, Brian, are you able to bring this up? I'm closing polls on my end. Well, maybe if any of you would like to pop into the QA area, just let me know, give me an idea of what kind of discussions you are having with your internal and external collaborators.
Sarah, just so you know, I was trying to share that poll.
Okay, that's great. I'm not sure what's going on. We will just go ahead and move on. I've got a few answers here, and it mostly seems to be that people, oh, nope, that's not the right poll. That's okay. All right, we'll move on. No problem. I'm wondering if the poll can come up. And if it doesn't, just think about this. How have you been managing your GIS data for public safety? Has it been with a third-party contractor? Do you have a GIS department? Not everybody has a GIS department, so that can be a real challenge. Sometimes people say, oh yeah, Google Maps is good enough. So it really kind of depends. Oh, looks like we do have a poll up. I'm going to give you all a moment. Thank you for answering this. That's great. Let's just wait a few more moments. It looks like the vast majority of you do have a GIS department, which doesn't surprise me because GIS is taking center stage and is clearly known around the world as a very significant and compelling area of expertise. So if we go back into the stakeholder idea, stakeholders really are what will create your community. And remember that with Legacy or E911, the major stakeholders were the service carriers because the calls were routed based on the alley and the MSAG. Now with NextGen 911, we have new stakeholders. The service carriers are out of the picture in this respect, and the stakeholders are now the 911 authority, the addressing authority, and the GIS data providers. And I'm sure that you all are already interacting back and forth with these groups. But it's time to really think about what needs to change and how do we do that? And this is where the challenge is. And remember at the very beginning, we talked about how successful change is made when a culture change is taken on as a business strategy. And we don't just allow culture to just unfold as it will, affected by any sort of variables. We want to come to it with a plan, with a goal, with a vision in mind. So there are 3 dimensions of culture that will affect its alignment. The first is symbolic reminders. I'm going to say like a police cap. When you see a police cap, you immediately get a sense of the law enforcement community and the culture, whether or not you're part of that. But just seeing that symbol of law enforcement brings any number of thoughts and feelings and emotions to people. So that's the symbolic aspect of culture. Another dimension of culture is what we would call keystone behaviors. So these are recurring acts that will trigger other behaviors. And sometimes these are both visible and invisible. So an example would be annual meetings or certain ways of doing business or certain workflows or chains of command. These are keystone behaviors that will influence people in their culture and that will help establish and keep a culture aligned. And the last dimension is mindsets, which of course are attitudes and beliefs. These are shared, but these are invisible. We can't see these. So the symbolic reminders are totally visible. Our keystone behaviors can be visible and invisible. And then our mindsets are exclusively invisible. And the interesting part to me is that it's the behaviors are actually the most powerful determinants of real change, because behaviors will establish what becomes symbols and mindsets will follow after behavior. So in terms of a mindset, think about, how do you value or position yourself within your community? Are you an educator? Do you share information? Do you have to navigate silos? Do you actively advocate for what your community needs? All of these types of things are going to roll into establishing a culture. So let's talk about what the 3 dimensions of a GIS and public safety culture might look like. And really, if we think about it, this new culture, this new marriage is a done deal. And you can call it an arranged marriage if you want. And just like regular marriages need communication and agreement symbols and behaviors and mindsets to ensure that the marriage is a success, this marriage isn't any different. So let's just think about what could be a symbolic reminder, any sort of visible artifact that brings in and marries GIS and public safety. When I first gave this presentation, I handed out pins to everybody that the pins say GIS data saves lives. So right there was a symbol that married these 2 functions and these 2 cultures together. So that's one of my favorite symbolic reminders. I'd be so curious to know what other people come up with as symbolic reminders that GIS and public safety are now absolutely and vitally intertwined. Let's think about keystone behaviors. So a keystone behavior could be, say, conferences. We are very used to having conferences in public safety. And now we get to create a whole new way of having conferences. And this is a keystone behavior. And even looking at the attendance numbers for even just this conference immediately tells us that this conference attendance and getting constant education is absolutely keystone to what we do in public safety and GIS. And what about new mindsets? What new mindsets might we need to develop with our new marriage partners, whether it's GIS to public safety or public safety to GIS? It's really easy to overlook this. It's so easy to get distracted and caught up in all the changes around us. And especially now, we are right smack dab in the middle of a massive change to not just our local environment and our local community, but statewide, countrywide, globally. And it's so easy to get distracted by this and get carried off into what might become a new default culture. And we need to remember that we have to take time to really deliberately establish, how do we want our new community to relate and interact? And we have to remember that building this foundation is exactly what we need to build in order to effectively weather any change. So the culture of GIS and public safety together needs to be very deliberately designed. How do we get a new culture rolling? At Datamark, we like to talk about collaboration and education and advocacy. So this is how I personally think that we need to get new culture rolling. So in collaboration, we're going to talk about embracing our role as geospatial first responders if we are GIS professionals. Without public safety grade GIS data, we're not going to get the calls routed correctly, and then our PSAP partners are not going to get what they need from us. And at this point, if the data is not clean and not updated and not maintained, then the system has already hiccuped. Hopefully it hasn't failed completely. And as I mentioned before, new to GIS is this urgency in the turnaround. And all of you folks in the PSAP, you're used to this urgency, so you can help your now GIS partners in helping to deal with this new urgency until it becomes more habitual. Now, as far as education, I like to say that education makes for location. And as we're doing right now, we need to constantly educate ourselves and our other stakeholder counterparts. Remember, the stakeholders now are the 911 authority, the addressing authority, and the GIS people. So again, we've got this new marriage with all these new people in this relationship. So we need to really understand what each other is doing. The addressing authority needs to understand how GIS comes into it and what might affect the 911 side, the PSAP side, either beneficially or adversely. And on the PSAP side, you need to know what's going on with your addressing authority, and you need to understand why reporting discrepancies is so valuable and crucial to the GIS side. And why do we need to educate ourselves? Because NextGen 911 starts with GIS now. This is new. And how do we do this? Keep on hosting workshops, meetings, socials, once we're allowed to do that again. And keep on attending conferences just like this. The final step for rolling this out to me is the advocacy. That's getting the word out. And again, all of you who are participating right now, you have already stepped into an advocate role because you have expressed your interest, you've expressed your commitment. And I would say that anything that triggers any interest in you, pursue that. Think of ways to bring in all of your stakeholders to share information. If something seems important to you, share that out. And we need to now champion GIS to all public safety, because GIS is no longer just a standalone. It is inextricably intertwined to this entire effort. To really get a new culture rolling, you need to have a strategic plan. And to get this type of initiative off the ground, of course, one of the most crucial elements would be to have the necessary resources. So if we can get one last poll going, Brian, do you think you can get one last poll going?
Gonna get it popped up here in just a second.
I also have it up on my screen. You just can't vote yet. So another big thing, and I know this is really heavy in everybody's mind, but just to know, how much funding do you need? This can be such a huge question to address. And of course, we're seeing states start to do their gap analysis, and this is fantastic because it shows that the states are really marrying together these GIS efforts with the public safety efforts. And it looks like we are getting some poll answers coming through. I'm going to wait a moment. I'm actually going to put this, just in case you can't see this, because I don't know if you can. All right, let's give a few more seconds, let some more tallies come in here. Okay, so a third of you have voted, thank you. And it looks like the majority of you either have it in your roadmap already, or you have a good idea of what you need to do, but it's more to do than what you have in the budget, which of course, because 911 historically has not received great funding notice, this leaves us in the lurch, right? And as we move forward, of course, budgetary cycles are always at least a year out, and this can be a great challenge. For those of you who need help, I definitely encourage you to get together with your counterparts, whether you're in GIS and need to go to public safety, or if you're in public safety and need to talk to your GIS counterparts. All right, so the strategic plan, I'm sharing results here. I hope you can see them. So we actually have what we like to call the 10 steps to data readiness. And when I first saw this, I thought, yes, this is great as a strategic plan. But when I really started thinking about the new public safety and GIS culture, I realized these are key behaviors for getting your new culture defined. So I'm going to share these with you. So the first step would be, as we've talked about, to start the conversation with your stakeholders. This can become a key behavior, and you can establish your regular meetings. You can establish all of these different ways of sharing and educating each other. And this will, of course, affect your mindset. Schedule meetings, get the ball rolling. Use Zoom like we're doing now. We're getting creative, and I'm sure the rest of you are going to get creative if you haven't already. But really, even if it's just an introduction, and just an introduction of, here's what I'm trying to achieve, and here are the roadblocks that I'm finding, and sharing that information. But the big piece here is to meet. This is another key behavior. Educate yourself and your stakeholders, and this can also take, this is also where advocacy can come in. So again, workshops, conferences, host them. Now that we're all stuck at home for the most part, there's really nothing standing in our way logistically of hosting a workshop or a conference, unless it's like quite literally bandwidth. So I think this is a great time right now to really embrace having these get-togethers virtually and establishing behaviors and getting them into place for when we can meet in person again. Another step would be to make a plan, and it sounds like a lot of you already have a plan, and we of course have our own idea of what a plan is, but I encourage you to come up with your own plan of what are the different steps that you're going to need to do to make sure that your GIS data is compliant to serve the public safety side of your community. And of course, assessing the current state of your GIS data. And this can happen on any level. This can happen at your local level all the way up to your state level. And eventually it's going to be a nationwide level. So I encourage you to find resources on being able to assess your data from a NextGen perspective. And if you don't know what the validations are that you need for a NextGen perspective, ask questions. Go to your resources, get this information, and you will be able to put this together. I do believe tomorrow, I think, is actually a great, very short presentation on key NextGen validations. Ask for resources. What an important behavior to establish in your new culture. If you run into problems, ask for resources. You have to work together now in this new way. You're even going to have to approach funding in a different way. Sometimes GIS might get funded by the sheriff's department. So this is absolutely crucial in communicating and pooling and sharing ideas about how to get resources appropriately distributed to all the stakeholders. If you don't have it, go get it. There are so many data sources out there. I know that a really hot topic is address points and sub-addressing. There are a lot of resources out there to help you with this. So whenever you can, use authoritative sources and don't reinvent the wheel. This would be a crucial behavior to help set your mindset for this new culture. You want to consider your data quality as well, because of course your PSAP, if you're in GIS, your PSAP partners are absolutely depending on this, as well as, and even more so, your public, because the people making the calls, they're absolutely relying on this. Working towards agreements and workflows. This will help mitigate risk, and risk is such a crucial element to what we all have to manage now. And again, this turnaround of 3 days, this is an urgency. There's a risk embedded in that. And again, PSAP, people are used to thinking about risk and used to dealing with urgencies. So share this. Help your GIS partners to come into this. And finally, rinse, wash, and repeat. And this, again, this is going to take all stakeholders to keep on maintaining and validating and sharing over and over and over. So I'd like to close with, this is absolutely one of my favorite quotes. We all know that location is important, and the time has come to fully embrace the massive impact that GIS can and will have on public safety, and how it's going to, and how this collaboration is going to create a whole new level of community and culture. GIS and public safety personnel are going to have to hold fast to the reality that both sides of this coin are key and vital to each other's success. And just as our current pandemic situation is compelling our entire nation to work together and with each other in new and innovative ways, this unfolding marriage between GIS and public safety is presenting us with remarkable opportunities to come together for 911. We are all in this together, and thank you so much for joining me today. I do think we've got some questions. Brian, maybe you can help me navigate these.
Yeah, I think one of a great one right off to start with, somebody is anonymous attendee has said we need a song at the end of the day. So got a song ready? I'm just
you'll have to PM me for that.
Could you please show steps 6, 7, and 8 again?
What can we go through and answer here? Right? Are there any standards? Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
And then here is another one, Sarah. I'm going to go ahead and read it off to you. Regarding the question about collaborating on GIS data sharing between agencies, starting the process of a memo of understanding to finalize GIS data sharing, working to collaborate, spread out the work, one agency. So it sounds like one agency manages the MSAG, one agency works on the emergency service boundaries, but we're still working in some silos of support for different computer-aided dispatch systems.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like they're limited on what kind of changes that they can make in their agency. They did like this 10 steps though. Any comments on that when they have so many people doing the different things?
Absolutely, yes. And without a doubt, we all have our work cut out for us. And Brian, I can see your name here. You're not alone. This is exactly why conferences and information sharing about NextGen is so crucial, because up to this point, as you've mentioned, we've got these solos, we've got these different organizations and agencies who they're really used to working by themselves. They've got their workflows, they've got their habits, they've got their mindsets, they've got their behaviors, they've got their symbolic reminders. And now NextGen is saying, you got to shake all that up. So I think one way to approach this is everybody involved. So Brian mentions the agency that manages the MSAG, the agency working on emergency service boundaries. So first and foremost, compassion. Compassion for each other, because we are all going through massive changes. And I'm not talking just about the pandemic, because we certainly have to have compassion with this situation. But beyond the pandemic, when that ends and we are really moving forward, to approach each other with compassion. It is really scary for some people to bring in change. Adaptation can be so difficult and so threatening. So I'd say when you sense a silo, when you sense that somebody is resistant to change, to recognize that this is out of, they're going to have their own deep internal reasons. So when you approach this with compassion, hey, this is a really hard thing to do. Hey, I'm really struggling with this. I was wondering if you have any ideas. This can turn communication around. Brian, maybe you can shoot back and tell me if you feel like I've answered this. I'm reading your questions still. We're still working in some silos because of support for different CAD systems. Yes, so if you're in GIS and you've never seen a CAD system at work, I really encourage you to go sit along at your local PSAP. Get to know your PSAP counterparts. Get to know the call takers and the dispatchers. Watch them as they use CAD. Watch them as calls come in. Watch and see what happens to the data. Look and see what searches hit and which don't. And if you're in PSAPs, I would extend invitations to your GIS folks. If you don't know who they are, start asking questions. Bring them into your fold, because public safety, as you know, 911's like magic to people who don't actually work in it. So I would encourage you to bring people into your PSAP fold and share with them what you do, and especially for the GIS folks, so they can see what your needs are, because somebody who's familiar with GIS is going to be able to look at what you're doing and go, aha, here's the solution. So Brian, I hope that helped answer your question. That's Brian on the Q&A, not Brian moderating this for me. Brian, who's moderating this, I think we have time maybe for one more question.
Well, there was, we've got several, and guys, we'll do our best to go through and answer these. We're not going to have time to get through it all right now, but there was a lot of interest in the WCA article.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to know where they could find that at.
Oh, okay. There's the Wisconsin Counties Association has a website, and I believe you can get that online. I believe we can also answer these questions and send them back out to everybody who's attending. So I will try to find a good link for that. And somebody says, can you please show steps 6, 7, and 8 again? And I will do that because I have that moment. And there you go. Catherine, I will go listen to your good song. Thank you. Some people are asking too about getting recordings. Those will come out next week. And no problem if you can't attend. Go ahead and register so you get the email links when those recordings are released. So unless there's a new question, and I'll scroll to the bottom here and see. And oh, thank you, Art, WisconsinCountiesAssociation.org. So thank you all very much for attending, and thank you for sticking with me to this late in the afternoon. And I hope you all join us with tomorrow's keynote speaker. Brian, I'm sure you can tell everybody what that is.
Yeah, Sarah, great job, and thank you for presenting today. Thank you all for tuning in for this final presentation of the day. Really like for you guys to tune in with us tomorrow morning at 8:30 Pacific time. We're going to be starting off with the keynote titled 911 Leadership in Times of Crisis. I'll be with Chris Carver from Hexagon. This is one you won't want to miss. If you know of some people that would benefit from that keynote or any other sessions the rest of the week, please make sure to share the information about the virtual conference. Everybody, I hope you have a safe and healthy and wonderful evening, and look forward to seeing you online tomorrow. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.